The first time Karen came to my property, she didn't even knock. She marched right past my fence like she was the queen of the county, clutching a clipboard like it was a royal decree. Her voice carried across my yard, dripping with the kind of self-importance that could strip paint off a wall. "You are in violation of HOA bylaws, Section 14, subparagraph 2, she announced, as though she were delivering the 10 Commandments. I blinked at her from my porch, coffee mug in hand, still half in the haze of a Sunday morning. "I'm not in your HOA, I said slowly, enunciating each word like I was talking to a tourist who thought they'd landed in Paris but somehow ended up in Cleveland. Her eyes narrowed, scanning my yard like a vulture trying to find something to feast on. "Every property in this subdivision falls under HOA authority," she declared, waving her clipboard like it had the power of law. That's when I realized she had no idea she was standing on the wrong side of history, and more importantly, the wrong side of the property line. The letter came 3 days later, typed in an over-serious Times New Roman, threatening legal action if I didn't cease unlawful occupancy and attend the next board meeting. I almost laughed, until I saw the demand for $4,500 in past dues. My gut tightened not because I owed it, but because I knew people like her made careers out of bullying folks into paying. That evening, I called my lawyer, a childhood friend named Sam who had the kind of quiet confidence that made judges lean forward when he spoke. "She's barking up the wrong tree," he said after reading the letter. "But if you want this to end fast, bring the deed." The night of the meeting was something out of a small-town courtroom drama. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I walked in with Sam, carrying a worn leather folder that held every piece of paper proving my property wasn't just outside their jurisdiction, it was never part of it to begin with. She didn't offer me a chair. "State your defense," she said, eyes gleaming like she'd already won. I placed the deed on the table and slid it toward her. "This land was parceled in 1974, 5 years before your HOA existed," I said, my voice steady but loud enough for the dozen residents in the back to hear. Sam leaned forward, tapping the notarized seal. "And as of this court-filed exemption in 1981, the HOA has no legal authority over Mr. Callahan's property." Karen's smirk faltered, replaced by the twitch of someone who just realized the train they were driving was headed straight off a cliff. She tried to recover, flipping through the papers like she might magically find a loophole. But the street name is the same," she stammered. "So is the weather," I shot back. "But that doesn't make you my boss." A ripple of laughter spread through the room, and one of her own board members coughed to hide a grin. Karen's face turned the shade of a fire hydrant, but before she could spit out another threat, Sam pulled out one last document, a letter from the county clerk confirming the property boundaries. "This," he said, "is why you're going to drop this suit before we file one for harassment, defamation, and attempted fraud." The silence was so thick you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. 3 minutes, that's all it took for the arrogance to drain from her face. She sat back, arms crossed so tightly it looked painful. "Fine," she muttered. "But don't think this is over." I smiled, leaning in just enough so she could see I meant every word. "Oh, it's over. You just don't like how it ended." What she didn't expect was the twist that came 2 weeks later. The county sent me a copy of an anonymous complaint she'd filed, claiming my property was being used for illegal commercial activity. Unfortunately for her, the sheriff who reviewed it was my cousin. He stopped by for coffee, shook his head, and said, "She's making herself a full-time job for the county." He also let slip that they were opening an investigation into her misuse of HOA funds. Apparently my case wasn't the first time she tried to shake someone down. When the news broke, the same neighbors who'd been too scared to speak up at the meeting started sending me stories. A widow down the street who'd been fined for having her son's wheelchair ramp out of code. A young couple forced to repaint their home 3 times because Karen didn't like the hue. She had a trail of intimidation stretching back years. And now the whole board knew she was a liability. By the time the county investigator showed up at her door with a warrant, half the neighborhood was watching from their lawns. I stayed on my porch, sipping coffee, while Karen's voice carried over the street, shrill and desperate. When they led her to the unmarked car, she caught my eye. For a second, I thought she might spit out one last insult, but all she did was look away. That was the first time I'd ever seen her silent. It's funny, the lawsuit that was supposed to ruin me became the thing that ended her reign. And all it took was 3 minutes, a little paperwork, and the truth she couldn't bend. Some people call it justice. I just call it Tuesday. The following week, I started noticing a strange quiet in the neighborhood. No clipped heels on the pavement. No barking orders from behind Karen's oversized sunglasses. Even her beloved white SUV, the one she used to park diagonally just to assert dominance, was gone from its usual spot. For a moment, I thought maybe she was lying low until things cooled off. But then Sam called. "You'll never believe this," he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. The county investigator pulled her HOA expense reports. They found over $30,000 in miscellaneous services with no receipts. Guess who those payments went to? I didn't have to guess. Her cousin's landscaping company? Bingo! And half the jobs were for properties that didn't even exist. The revelations spread like wildfire. The same neighbors who used to pretend not to know me at the mailbox were suddenly stopping by to chat, each with their own Karen horror story. The widow with the ramp told me how Karen had threatened to revoke her property privileges unless she removed it. Another man explained that Karen fined him for having his American flag at the wrong angle. One evening, I got a knock on the door. It was a young mom named Rebecca, someone I'd barely spoken to before. She held out a manila envelope. "I don't know if this helps, but I found these in my garage. Old HOA newsletters. Karen bragged about winning a legal dispute with you back in 2018. But you didn't even live here then, did you?" I shook my head. "Never set foot in this place before last year." Sam took one look at those newsletters and grinned. "She forged history. This just keeps getting better." It all came to a head at the emergency HOA meeting the board called to vote on her removal. The rec center was packed, more people than I'd ever seen in one place here. Karen walked in flanked by 2 friends, her face pale but her chin held high. She still thought she could bluff her way through. The board president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Alan, cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitfield, the county has presented overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct and abuse of authority. We're giving you the opportunity to step down voluntarily." Karen crossed her arms. "This is a witch hunt. You're all just jealous because I actually enforce the rules." From the back, someone shouted, "Rules don't include stealing." Another voice chimed in, "Or lying about who's in the HOA." The room erupted in murmurs. Alan raised a hand for silence. "We've taken a vote. The result is unanimous." He looked her straight in the eye. "You are hereby removed as HOA president, effective immediately." The gasp from her own friends was louder than anything else. Karen stood frozen for a moment before slamming her clipboard on the table so hard the pen bounced to the floor. "You'll regret this," she spat, but her voice cracked. By the time she stormed out, half the room had their phones up, recording every second. It was the first time I'd seen the neighborhood united. Not in fear, but in defiance. The county's criminal case moved faster than I expected. Turns out, when you mix fraud with harassment and a paper trail a mile long, the DA doesn't waste time. Karen was charged with multiple counts, including attempted extortion case being one of the key examples. She tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but those old newsletters and the county clerk's letter buried her defense before it even began. The trial was short, brutal, and public. The local paper ran daily updates, and by the 3rd day, everyone knew about the landscaping scam, the phantom fines, and the intimidation tactics. I attended the final hearing, sitting in the back row while Sam argued on behalf of the neighbors she'd wronged. The judge didn't mince words. "Ms. Whitfield, your actions demonstrate a willful disregard for the law and the rights of property owners. You have weaponized your position for personal gain, and you have eroded the trust of your community. You will serve 6 months in county jail and pay restitution to those you defrauded." Karen's jaw dropped, but no tears came. Maybe she'd run out of them. As the bailiff led her away, she glanced around the courtroom, but no one would meet her eyes. The queen of control had been dethroned, and she knew it. Afterward, Alan approached me outside the courthouse. "You know," he said, "if you hadn't stood your ground, she might still be running this place into the ground." He handed me a small box. Inside was a wooden plaque engraved with the words, "For standing up when it mattered." I'm not much for keepsakes, but that one's hanging in my workshop. Not because I need to remember beating Karen, but because it reminds me how fast a bully's power crumbles when people stop letting them rewrite the rules. The neighborhood's different now. The board is transparent, dues are reasonable, and for the first time, I've actually seen folks smiling at the annual meeting instead of glaring at each other. Even the widow's ramp got a fresh coat of paint, courtesy of volunteers. Every so often, someone new moves in and asks about the woman who used to run the place. The regulars exchange a knowing look, and someone inevitably points to the wooden sign I keep leaning against the fence. The one from the day I shut her down. It's a simple message, handwritten in black paint. Not in your HOA, because sometimes the shortest truths leave the deepest marks. And if you were here, standing on my porch, looking out at the street where it all went down, I'd tell you the same thing I tell every new neighbor who hears the story: stand your ground, know your rights, and never let someone bully you into playing by rules that were never yours to begin with. Now I'll ask you, reader, was I right to shut her down in 3 minutes? Or should I have let it play out longer just to watch her fall?